All right, the third and final part of this Chapter 5 test deals with simplifying to a single term. Somewhat similar to verifying an identity, but in this case you do not have an equal sign and then telling you what it has to get down to. Instead, you have to take this particular expression and get it down to one term. So, in looking at this one, tangent of pi over 2 minus x is the same as cotangent of x from your cofunction identities times secant of x. And then in order to multiply these two things, we should convert everything to sines and cosines. And cotangent is cosine of x over sine of x. And secant is 1 over cosine of x. And then by your multiplication properties and fractions, you can divide out a cosine, and you are left with 1 over sine of x, which is the same as cosecant of x. And now we have one term. Our second example would be sine of a negative x cotangent x over sine of pi over 2 minus x. Sine of a negative x is the same as a negative sine of x. Cotangent of x is the same as cosine of x over sine of x. And sine of pi over 2 minus x is the same as cosine of x. Now then, in working with just the numerator, that would be over 1, and then just like in the previous example, you can divide out a sine to be left with a negative cosine of x over cosine of x. And then those two divide out and you're left with negative 1. And that is one term. And example 3 is sine of pi over 4 plus x plus sine of pi over 4 minus x. Here you have a couple of options. One is to use your sum and difference identities. And take each part of that. So sine of pi over 4 plus x, that would be considered your x, that would be your y. And so you would have sine of pi over 4 cosine of x plus cosine of pi over 4 sine of x plus, and then sine of pi over 4 minus x, there's your x, there's your y. Then you would have sine of pi over 4 cosine of x minus cosine of pi over 4 sine of x. At this point then, you can simplify these as much as possible. Sine of pi over 4 is the square root of 2 over 2 cosine x plus square root of 2 over 2, because cosine of pi over 4 is that as well. Sine of x plus square root of 2 over 2 cosine of x minus square root of 2 over 2 sine of x. And then from this, that and that can be added together. And the square root of 2 over 2 plus the square root of 2 over 2 would get you 2 square root of 2 over 2 cosine of x, which that you can divide out a 2 on each to get the square root of 2 cosine of x. And then these other two is a positive square root of 2 over 2 sine x and a negative square root of 2 over 2 sine x, which those two added together make 0. And so we are left with our one term, and we are done. A second route to take with this particular problem would be to not use the sum and difference identities, but instead use the sum to product identities. And in this case, this whole thing would be considered your x. That whole thing would be considered your y. And in your sum to product identities, it would be 2, because you have sine plus sine. That formula is 2 times sine of x plus y, so pi over 4 plus x plus pi over 4 minus x divided by 2. And then it is cosine of x minus y, so pi over 4 plus x minus pi over 4 minus x. And that is still divided by 2. Now then, doing some simplifying, pi over 4 plus pi over 4 is 2 pi over 4. And when you divide those two things out, you get pi over 2. So you would have 2 sine and 2, well, let's back up to this. Pi over 4 plus pi over 4 is 2 pi over 4. Divided by 2 would be the same as multiplying by 1/2, and then the 2's go away and you'd be left with pi over 4. And x plus a negative x is 0. Divided by 2 is still 0. So we have 2 sine pi over 4. On the cosine one, pi over 4 plus pi over 4 minus pi over 4 is 0. Divided by 2 is still 0. And then x minus negative x would be a positive 2x. Divided by 2 is x. So cosine of x. And then we know that cosine or sine of pi over 4 is the square root of 2 over 2. And when you multiply that by 2, the 2's get divided out, and you're left with the square root of 2 cosine x. And now this is our single term again. As an added bonus for watching this video, we will look at one more example. And in this example, we will have 1 plus cotangent of x over cosine of x minus cosecant of x. And we want to get this down to one term. So the first thing, 1 plus cotangent, or actually we're going to change that right now to cosine of x over sine of x, and still over cosine of x minus 1 over sine of x. And now in order to combine these things, this fraction and this fraction, we need common denominator, which in this case would be cosine of x, sine of x. We have to multiply this by sine of x to get to cosine x, sine of x. So we need to take the numerator by it as well. And sine of x times 1 is sine of x. And sine of x times cosine over sine would be like sine over 1 times cosine over sine. And the sines would go away. And so then it would be plus cosine of x. And then with this fraction, sine has to be multiplied by cosine of x. And so cosine of x times 1 is minus cosine of x. And now from this we can simplify. Positive cosine and a negative cosine makes 0. So we are left with sine of x over cosine of x, sine of x. And then we can divide out a sine of x to get 1 over cosine of x. And 1 over cosine is the same as secant of x. And that would be our singular term. Then there will be a few questions dealing with previous material covered in the class. And it's the final part of this test, so that will make you very happy once the day is over.